along, I've said to our audience on many occasions, think about policy and where policy comes from. This morning I saw this tweet by Andrew Bridgen. He says it's all starting to come out now. So this is Disclosed TV, he's forwarding. Scientist says the overwhelming consensus on climate change crisis is manufactured by a massive government-funded climate alarmist complex. And this takes you through to reports about a particular lady called Judith Curry. The New York Post here, scientist admits the overwhelming consensus on the climate change crisis is manufactured. So I'm going to suggest that this is one of the reasons why the establishment is so fearful, is because we now have professionals and experts in their own right challenging the system. I discovered that this lady was also mentioned in the Scientific American back in 2010. Climate heretic, Judith Curry turns on her colleagues. Why can't we have a civil conversation about climate? And in the article, I was fascinated to see reference to a particular gentleman, S. Alexander Haslam, who's part of the Department of Psychology, University of Exeter. And this was the quote: the climate community, he says, is engaging in classic black sheep syndrome. Members of a group may be annoyed by public criticism from outsiders, but they reserve their greatest anger for insiders who side with outsiders. By treating Curry as a pariah, Haslam says scientists are only enhancing a reputation as some kind of renegade who speaks truth to power. Even if she is substantially wrong, it's not in the interests of climate scientists to treat Curry as merely an annoyance or a distraction. I think her criticisms are damaging, Haslam says, but in a way that's a consequence of failing to acknowledge that all science has these political dynamics. So we have to go to the Department of Psychology to get a view on what you are and are not allowed to say about climate change. But we can follow this theme through. This was I'm going to call it a tweet, an X by Tony Young. Little known to the voting public, Conservatives, Labour and Lib Dems have all signed up for legally binding 5-year plans. And if we have a look at this, I've taken this quote from the Telegraph article. What is it with bureaucrats and their 5-year plans? The Soviets went through 12 of them, devised by Moscow's infamous Gosplan. The Chinese are currently on their 14th, firmly focused on achieving geopolitical supremacy. Unbeknown to most voters, the central planners have also unleashed on Britain not to maximise the production of widgets, but to make sure we reach net zero. And the point being made very strongly here is that the public are simply not being told about this, and that they're calling net zero a permanent revolution. So my point is that we have to follow the policy and where the policy comes from. And as we're going to see, one of the places, the key places, of course, is connected to the UN. But here's Professor Norman Fenton, well known to the UK column, and a man who's been doing some really excellent work challenging the figures and statistics. And he says to us, well, remember that the UN owns the science. And he's quite right, of course. We have played this little clip previously, but let's have a look at it again in the context of the control over the narrative and the policy from the United Nations.
If anybody is still in any doubt about the extent to which the climate change narrative is a scam, here's the UN's Under-Secretary General for Global Communications, Melissa Fleming, speaking at a World Economic Forum event in October 2022.
You know, we partnered with Google, for example. If you Google climate change, you will, at the top of your search, you will get all kinds of UN resources. We started this partnership when we were shocked to see that when we Googled climate change, we were getting incredibly distorted information right at the top. So we're becoming much more proactive. You know, we own the science, and we think that the world, you know, should know it, and the platforms themselves also do.
So the question is, can we, ordinary people, challenge what's happening? Well, the answer to that is yes. Have a look at this report from the Eastern Daily Press. Norfolk County Council, no plans for 20-minute neighbourhood, and they're pulling back on plans. They now say there's no plans to bring in the measures and have distanced themselves from the concept of the so-called 20 minutes neighbourhoods. How has this come about? Well, I was able to interview an excellent gentleman, Bob Seys, who's been working very hard to force this particular effect. So let's listen to what he said. So, Bob, thank you very much for joining us. What I want to find out is where things are in Norfolk. I know something's happening because there's been a report in the local paper saying that issues to do with 15-minute cities have been put on hold. So it certainly seems that there's been a reaction from Norfolk County Council. Bring us up to date.
Well, basically that's it. It was quite a surprise to me to see it in the Eastern Daily Press. It looks like they've pulled out of 15-minute cities, ULEZ style sort of plans. But I was a little bit concerned when I saw there was one line in there said, well, we won't be going under this name of 15-minute city ULEZ. So now I'm thinking, is this a case of they've dipped their toe in the water, they've tested public opinion, and will it be rolled in through the back door in some other form? We know this is a global rollout, so have we just put a spanner in the works, or have they put it to bed?
I'm really interested in that you've come back to me with that, because I did a little bit of homework before speaking to you, and I had a look at the Norfolk Local Transport Plan number 4, and initially everything is talking about local transport needs. It's about Norfolk, but eventually you get into a particular segment which says that international agreements and policies are influencing what the future of transport looks like. For example, the Paris Agreement 2015 is a United Nations commitment. So very quickly, albeit buried in the middle of the report, Norfolk County Council is forced to admit that the policy that they're putting together, that they want to push out on the wider public, stems back to United Nations policies.
Yes. Absolutely, which sort of brings me to the, what I was going to say anyway, which was, we know this all comes under the climate crisis banner, and something that we've been pushing for around here in Suffolk and Norfolk is that we've now started to approach our councils and say, give us evidence of this climate crisis. And what we're discovering just in conversation is that none of them can provide any evidence of climate crisis. And so now we've had to go down the freedom of information route so that we can get that documented to basically start discrediting our councils.
Okay, and just another point that I picked up from the report in the local reporter concerns Steve Morphew, the opposition leader of the Labour Party. And he says it's really time for a grown-up conversation rather than using this as a desperate election ploy. You can't please all of the people all of the time, but local schemes designed with local knowledge usually work better and work out less expensive. And then he says, the county council has lost a lot of trust over roads. That's been replaced by suspicion and conspiracy theories. It's going to take a lot of work to win back that trust. And I thought this was what did I think? This was just the usual incredible party politics. So their own documents show that this links back to United Nations policy, including climate change, which was in the section I mentioned a couple of minutes ago. You know that's the case. And yet we've got local councillors that are busy trying to say, if you suggest that's the case, you're a conspiracy theorist.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's funny that you say it's time for a grown-up conversation. The bugbear has been the fact that there was no grown-up conversation from the get-go, was there? And it's quite disappointing. 5 of us had a meeting with with the local Suffolk Council here, West Suffolk Council recently, and the attitude really after placing evidence in front of them would perhaps discredit their cause, was met with arrogance and an attitude of, well, we have declared this and that's final. So it looks like at least Norfolk are starting to admit that we need to talk about it, but as yet Suffolk are a little bit reticent, if that's a word.
Yes, absolutely, and that's a very good point. Now, just for our audience, because a lot of people who watch the UK column, they're understanding that there are some pretty terrible things happening and policies are being enacted over which people have not been consulted. You have acted with a relatively small group of people. You've taken on the local council in a very measured way. You forced the meetings, I think it is, with the council where you raise these issues. And here we are a few months later, where it might not be perfect, but what are we seeing? We are seeing Norfolk County Council stepping back, as you just said, and wanting maybe, we need to think about consultation. For members of the public who haven't been engaged in any, I'll call it activist work with a small a, what would you say to them about getting out there and doing something? How did your team make this change in Norfolk County Council?
Well, as I said to you, before when I spoke to you in April, the whole thing was just behind. It was just about a bit of leafleting to start with to get people aware of potential changes, and then it was the reason it became such a big issue with the council is because we'd put on one of these leaflets that the next council meeting was going to be about this 15-minute issue, when in actual fact it wasn't. So the council hall was overloaded to breaking point, and that's what got the ball rolling. But the really good thing from it is one of the guys at LSP Film Productions recorded it, and it went worldwide. It's quite funny, actually. You're probably aware of the Stand in the Park. We have one of those every Sunday. And quite recently, there was a couple from Australia rocked up, and they came to visit us. They're here on holiday. They came to visit us just to say well done. And it was quite funny. One of them walked up to me and said, "You're Bob?" And I said, "Yeah, I am." And he said, "You lot are famous in Australia." So what we did actually went worldwide. And as you can see from a lot of the YouTube videos now, there's a lot of people confronting their councils. So it's worked wonders, isn't it? One thing I am sort of suspicious of, it's good to be suspicious, is that the Norfolk County Council back down, so to speak, has sort of coincided with Sunak turning around and announcing he's not against the motorist. He's not anti-motorist, which also coincides with him releasing or signing licenses to start drilling for gas and petrol, which just coincidentally comes just after his family have apparently, and I'll say apparently, just bought quite a huge amount of shares in BP. So it sounds great, but there's a lot of underlying coincidences.
Bob, fascinating. A lot of manoeuvring under the surface. I think the word you needed there was allegedly. Is allegedly bought. That's the correct one. Yes, but fascinating. But nevertheless, I think we could probably say with some confidence that Sunak's had to change his position because of the wider pushback by people within the UK, and you're absolutely demonstrating that. And what a story that a few of you start locally, you stand up to challenge your local council, and where does it go? Ultimately, what you did goes worldwide. That's really impressive, and it should be a big encouragement to viewers of the UK column.
Yeah. Ultimately, it's a numbers game, isn't it? And you've only got to look at the pushback on ULEZ and what Khan is doing in London. He carries no weight statistically. It's been to the judicial. It's been for a judicial review. We always knew that the judicial review wouldn't go our way, with the courts being set up the way they are. But I won't go too deep into that because that would be conspiratorial. But yeah, on the big upside is it's now a numbers game. There are too many people aware of what the government and their overlords are trying to inflict on us, and I think it's becoming quite apparent now that the people have said no.
Bob, thank you very much indeed. Really excellent summary, and we hope to see more of you in the future. Thank you for joining us. So there we are. That's what one man and a small group of people can achieve. Of course, many more people working in that way can achieve a lot more. So great report.